Hey guys, in this video I'm going to talk about creatine. So I'm going to be going over the physiology, how it functions, how it works in our body, what the research has to say about it, and then my own personal observation as far as supplementation with it, what kind of an impact it has had for me, as well as some personal opinions I have on it. Okay, so starting off with the physiology, creatine is involved in what we call bioenergetics, which is just cells, not just muscle cells, but all cells, producing and consuming energy. Okay, so muscle cells in particular, they rely on ATP to function. Muscular activity consumes ATP, and it can be consumed very quickly. A muscle's entire stores of ATP at higher intensity activity can be depleted within just 3 or 4 seconds. So a muscle cell has 3 methods of resynthesizing that ATP so that muscle activity may continue. The first is aerobic ATP synthesis, which is infinite in duration. It lasts forever, but it has a relatively low rate of production. Secondly, glycolysis, which has a higher potential rate of ATP production, but it is finite in duration. Thirdly would be phosphocreatine, or the phosphagen system, and it's the shortest in duration in terms of how long it can supply ATP, but it is the most quickly acting, the most powerful, if you will. So in the sarcoplasm, in the muscle cell, as well as in other cells, not just muscle cells, but creatine binds to phosphate. It becomes phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate. And it is present in the sarcoplasm together with ATP. When ATP is consumed, phosphocreatine donates its phosphate group to ADP, which is the product of ATP hydrolysis, resulting in the regeneration of ATP. Okay, so being present in solution, it is immediately available. It is the fastest acting. So when rates of ATP consumption are highest, or our exercise intensity is the highest, we are most dependent on the phosphagen system. I like to describe it as a buffer. Okay, if you've ever taken a chemistry class, if you're familiar with acid-base buffers at all, it's exactly the same concept as a buffer, except in this case it's a buffer against fluctuations in ATP. So we have 2 sort of actions, if you will, working in tandem. One, muscle activity reducing the concentration of ATP, and then glycolysis and aerobic production increasing the concentration of ATP. And so while both of these forces will tend to cause fluctuations in ATP, the phosphagen system reduces the magnitudes of these fluctuations in ATP so that exercise can be consistent even with extremely high intensity bouts. Okay, so what's the impact of supplementing with creatine? So the idea is that if we take creatine, we can elevate our the quantity of phosphocreatine present in the cell, thus providing a greater buffer and possibly an extension of extremely high intensity activity. Also notable is that it shifts the osmotic gradient. What does that mean? So any cell in your body, it has a lot of stuff in it. Okay, that could be nutrients and proteins, all sorts of different molecules, and it likes to balance the amount of stuff it has with the amount of water it has in the cell. So if there's more phosphocreatine in the cell, there's more stuff in the cell, so it likes to have more water in the cell as well. Okay, we call that the osmotic gradient. And so the consequence of this is, with more phosphocreatine, we expect the cell to absorb more water as well, which has a greater impact on its size and weight as well. Okay, so what does the research say about supplementation with creatine? So it's important to know, I want to point out, creatine is an essential molecule, not just in muscle cells, but in nerve cells and almost every cell. I want to say every cell, but I probably shouldn't. But a lot of cells in your body use the phosphagen system for energy synthesis, and so your body produces creatine naturally. It is also present in foods, particularly in muscle meat that we eat. But the research has shown that taking 5 grams of creatine monohydrate per day results in muscle cells being saturated with phosphocreatine. Saturation means that they cannot possibly hold anymore. Okay, you have a natural level, you supplement with creatine, you are at the maximum level of phosphocreatine. Okay, it's also clearly demonstrated that that supplementation increases muscle mass. Okay, that's primarily due to the osmotic gradient that I explained formerly. So it's not that you're laying down more contractile proteins, increasing enzyme concentrations and things like that. It's the osmotic gradient. You're pulling water into the cell. Okay, it's also shown a very clear increase in high intensity performance, weightlifting volumes, and overall exercise performance. Okay, that's exactly what we'd expect based on the physiology, based on the bioenergetic involvement of creatine. And it's really cool. It's very clear when they've measured this that it is an extremely effective supplement. Researchers also demonstrated it to improve memory and intelligence. Okay, I know I'm talking about muscles a lot, but I did mention many cells use the creatine system, including nerves, to produce energy, and so they've demonstrated that as well, working memory and intelligence, even in healthy patients. Likewise, they've also used creatine a lot in the management of neurological pathologies, particularly degenerative diseases. There's a lot that they've worked with on this, actually, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, Huntington's disease. A lot of those degenerative neurological pathologies are going to have an influence on muscle activity. Right, Parkinson's is a really good example of that. So creatine might be affecting the function of the muscle directly in relation to these diseases, but it can also affect the function of the nerves. And it's been demonstrated in a lot of cases to help control symptoms. Really cool. As far as adverse effects go, there's almost nothing. A few people, quite rare, seem to get some kind of bloating, some gastrointestinal distress, but that's extremely rare. Okay, creatine is one of the most extensively studied supplements out there, and it has been demonstrated time and time again to be extremely safe. I think this makes sense since it's present in our food anyway. It's not particularly foreign. It's not a foreign substance. I also like to point out what is not demonstrated, and top of that list is maximum instantaneous force or power production. Okay, I talked about the bioenergetics. Creatine is a molecule that helps supply energy to extend activity, okay? Which might help you do more of a given activity, but in terms of something like your one rep max on a bench press or your vertical jump, things like that, the amount of peak force production is going to be limited by other factors such as contractile protein density and cross-sectional area, as well as some other enzymatic factors and things like that. But in extremely short peak intensity bouts, ATP consumption or ATP is not the limiting factor, and so you shouldn't expect creatine to help you, but that's been consistent with research. It hasn't been demonstrated to do that. Likewise, elevated muscle protein synthesis has not been demonstrated from creatine supplementation. Okay, meaning it has demonstrated muscle mass, but that's due to the osmotic gradient, and it's a short term. Once your muscle cell is saturated, you're not going to continue to get an increased uptake of water. So whether you're taking creatine or not, that doesn't really seem to have any effect on how much your muscle can develop over time. Okay, so in terms of long-term development advantage, if you're getting on creatine, getting off creatine, does it make any difference? I don't think so, right? It certainly hasn't been demonstrated, right? That's the important part. So think of it as a performance advantage as long as you're taking it, and that's about it. Okay, the thought is that, well, if I'm able to do a few more reps in the gym or something like that, I'm going to grow more, but that just hasn't been shown, so don't expect it. Okay, my personal observations and experience. So when I first started lifting weight, I was not taking creatine, and I did very well. I saw progress very quickly because I was methodical, I studied, and I was consistent. I started taking creatine, a couple months in, and I was still having excellent progress. But I've taken it since then, except for 1 4-month period. So I don't have a lot of, being on creatine and being off creatine to make comparisons between. But I'll tell you what I can. The difference that I've seen in gym performance has been imperceivable. Okay, if you're doing 4 sets of 10 or something, and creatine helps you squeeze out one more rep on one more set, big whoop. I can't tell. My progress was incredible. When I started taking it, it was already incredible. It continued to be incredible. And during that 1 4-month period, I had already been lifting for, I guess, about 5.5 years at that point. Everything was still going great. I didn't notice anything reduce when I stopped taking it, and when I got back on it, I didn't notice anything go back up. Too bad. Also, I mentioned working memory and intelligence. Yeah, I didn't notice anything in my intelligence either. Right when researchers are intensely quantifying these variables in highly controlled settings, they can find what's statistically significant, and they can find very small improvements. But in terms of regular life, certainly didn't notice anything myself, and I never talked to anyone who has either. I also want to point out that your body weight is perhaps just as impactful as the potential performance benefits of supplementing with creatine. If you're, I weigh about 180 pounds right now. If creatine is due to the water weight, right, due to that osmotic gradient is having me hold, 2 more pounds of water, but it's giving me, that's about a 1% increase in my body weight, and let's say it's a 1% increase in performance as well. Something like pull-ups, where the creatine might be an advantage as far as strength, but a disadvantage because your body is heavier. They kind of balance each other out. And then certainly on something like running, it's only 1 pound, but 1 or 2 pounds, but you're going to do better without that on you, especially when creatine isn't benefiting you in that type of activity. Right, but generally, what I want to point out here is that even though performance improvements have been demonstrated, I want your expectations to be realistic, right? Are they actually perceivable? For me, no. Okay, and a lot of that has to do with, or it could have to do anyway, with what I want to point out is natural sources. Okay, I mentioned that creatine is synthesized naturally by your body, as well as omnivorous diets, right? Because creatine is stored primarily, right? The largest stores are in the muscle. So those who eat muscle meat, right? Those who eat a lot of meat are going to be consuming pretty decent amounts of creatine as well. All right, typically between 1 or 3 grams, based on how much meat you eat. But the less creatine you're consuming naturally, then the more of an impact you might expect from creatine supplementation. So I just say all that to keep your expectations realistic. Although it has been shown to be effective, these differences are pretty small. It really comes back to the same thing. If you really want long-term progress and strength, eat your protein, train hard, go to bed on time. That's creatine pales in comparison to doing those basics. So do I use creatine? Yes, I do. I use 5 grams a day to keep my body stores saturated. But I'd actually like to stop. Right now, my body weight is important. I have to keep it at a certain point, so I'm not stopping right now. But based on my experience being off it before and what I've perceived, and also to save, it's pretty cheap, but even to save, just a couple dollars a month or so, I'd actually I plan on stopping again once I'm able to reduce my body weight. But I hope this was educational. Make your choice. It has been shown to be effective, but keep your expectations realistic, please. If you want to use it, there's no harm. There's certainly no harm in it, but I'll leave that up to you guys. I hope this was helpful. If you liked the video, like it. If you want to see more, subscribe. Other than that, thank you all, and peace out.